Item: SCP-570. Object Class: Safe. Special Containment Procedures: SCP-570 is to be contained within a reinforced steel containment locker. No personnel are permitted to wear SCP-570, and all subjects who have worn it during testing are to have it removed immediately afterwards. Personnel who have worn SCP-570 are to be given medical treatment for their hands following removal. Description: SCP-570 is a pair of cotton gloves. When worn, they will extend between 100-150 cotton fibers into the outer epidermal layer of the subject's hand. Removing SCP-570 after this point will cause extreme damage to the subject's epidermal and muscle tissue. Following initial exposure to SCP-570, these fibers will migrate throughout the subject's body, eventually establishing contiguous connections to 80% of the subject's muscle tissue. Subjects affected by SCP-570 are classified as SCP-571. Instances of SCP-571 are capable of controlling the actions of any living organism they have physically contacted while wearing SCP-570. Subjects are connected to SCP-571 by several strings, which are produced from its fingers. These strings are not composed of the same material as SCP-570. Instead, they contain DNA and match the composition of the SCP-571's muscle tendons. With practice, instances of SCP-571 are capable of controlling up to 20 subjects at once, by extending multiple strings out to the affected subjects from their fingertips. Note that the SCP-571 instance controls the others by use of physical movement. Subjects will have to act carefully, due to the potential of tangling SCP-570's strings when there is a large number of affected subjects. SCP-571 subjects appear to be endowed with some basic knowledge of puppeteering techniques. However, instances with a background in marionette use will be more able to utilize SCP-570. After bringing multiple subjects under their control, the SCP-571 instances and subjects will begin to seek out any gathering of prepubescent subjects, and use the persons they have attached themselves in order to put on puppet shows. SCP-571 and its affected subjects will recreate any stories they know which are easily understood by children, and usable with the number of persons they have under their control. These puppet shows may last from anywhere between 1 hour and several days, depending on the length of the story and the number of subjects involved. Following the completion of the show, all subjects will be released from SCP-571. Subjects who are under SCP-570's control will suffer no immediate side effects after being released, with the exception of a strong sense of longing. Because of this, many subjects will eventually try to take possession of SCP-570 and attempt to create shows of their own. Subjects will claim that they experienced extreme feelings of joy and belonging when performing, and wish to give these feelings to others. This effect is not universal, and will only manifest in subjects who previously displayed symptoms of depression and anxiety. SCP-570 was recovered from Uncle Pappy's Magic Emporium, which was a magic trick puppeteering business. The proprietor of the store had become an SCP-571 instance, and used SCP-570 on the parents of children who came into his store. Following reports from local law enforcement officers after witnessing SCP-570, Foundation personnel were deployed and containment was enacted. As of the 18th of September 1976, SCP-570 has been classified as safe.